So today we're going to do our last skill that we need to do for factoring in this chapter. And then the rest of the chapter is basically just a bunch of practice and special circumstances that you might run into. So again, we have had the first kind of factoring, which was factor by the greatest common factor. We have had factor by grouping, which is what we learned last time. And this time, for a lack of calling it anything better, I think I called it guess and check. There are a lot of different ways. I'll give you a couple of extra videos that show you a couple of different ways to do it, other than the way that I like to do it personally, and you can go from there. So problem number one, and again, this is on CUDA software. This is factoring polynomials. This worksheet says that a is equal to 1. There is another worksheet that we're going to look at, which is in the same spot, and it's where a is not equal to 1, where a is greater than 1. But the same structure works for all of those. So I'm going to look at a problem like this, and it says that I want it to be factored. But I have to remember, and I think I mentioned this when we were talking about it in the last chapter, I have to remember that structure that FOIL gives me. FOIL is first times first, outside times outside, inside times inside, and last times last. What does that mean? That means that if I have a question like this, where it's a binomial times a binomial, I take the first times the first and get a squared. I take the outside times the outside and get negative 3a. I take the inside times the inside and get positive 4a. And I take the last times the last and get negative 12. Now that's what we've done. That's what you learned how to do in last chapter. Now I'm going to reverse the process. We knew from last chapter that I went ahead and combined those terms to get a final answer of a squared plus 1a minus 12. But this piece right here came from first times first. And this piece right here came from last times last. And this number right here came from the outside and the insides added together. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to reverse the process. I'm going to look at the first term and put it in the first places as factors. I'm going to look at the last term and put it in the last place as factors. And then I'm going to look at that middle term as if it were a combination of two pieces put together. Okay, so let's try that. If I have something like number 5 here, this is where the first and the first came from, and this is where the last and the last came from, and those are multipliers. So there are only so many different ways that I can multiply and get these things. For n squared, the only way that I can multiply and get n squared is if it were an n and an n. And I know that number came from the first spot times the first spot. So I'm going to go ahead and put that n and n in the first spots. Now, the next one that I can look at is the last spot, because those are easy to spot. These are easy to find. And I like to write a list of all of my possibilities, just because if I'm guessing and checking, then I know where I've gone and which ones I've used and which ones I've checked and which ones I've guessed and so forth and so on. So I have two different possibilities for what could go in here for the last times the last. And here's how you decide. Remember, this number came from the inside and the outside put together. Well, the inside involves this piece, and the outside involves that piece. So whatever numbers that I put in here have to come from the 9, but they have to work to give me 10. and a negative 10 at that. Well, looking at my choices, are there any numbers that I can multiply to give me 9 and add or subtract to give me 10? And this looks like a good shot. So I'm going to put that in there in those spots and see what it can do for me. Now I need a negative 10, so in order to add together to get a negative 10, that needed to be a negative 9 and a negative 1. Let's just check and make sure that does what I want it to do. So first times first is n squared. Outside times outside gives me negative 9n. Inside times inside gives me negative 1n. And last times last gives me positive 9. When I combine those, do I end up with my original problem? And yes, I do. So this is the way we need to work on that. Okay, let's try it again. Number 7. I have my first times my first is going to give me m squared. The only way to get m squared is to multiply m times m. And my last times my last is 24. Now there are lots of choices, so I'm just going to write them down. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, and I think that's all of it. Remember, the last and the outside and the inside work together. It's last times last, but adding the insides and the outsides. So these two pieces, when I put them together, have to give me 2. And I put them together by adding or subtracting. So if I add these two numbers or subtract them, I'm not going to get 2. Not going to get 2. Not going to get 2. This looks like a good shot at it. So I'm going to try the 6 and the 4. Now I want 2, and I want a positive 2 out of it. So I don't know exactly what signs I'm going to need to put in there, but I'm just going to check and make sure. So first times first is m squared. Outside times outside is going to be a 6m of some sort. Inside times inside is going to be a 4m of some sort. And last times last is going to be 24. So the only thing I have to do now is work out the signs. How do I get a positive 2 from these two? Well, that would have to be positive, and that would have to be negative, which would make my last times last a negative 24. Let's just check. M squared plus 2m minus 24 is exactly what the problem asked me to do. So I've got it. Let's try it again. If I had a question similar to this one, same idea. Number 8. First times first gives me x squared, so I'm going to go with an x and an x. And 24, well, I already had those listed on the last one. And again, this is just a way for me to keep track of which ones I've done and which ones I haven't done. And the outsides and the insides are supposed to give me negative 4x. If I add them, that's not happening. 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 Did I miss anything? Don't think so. We could try one of them and just see. So if I tried this one, 3 and 8. First times first would be x squared. Outside times outside would be 3x. Inside times inside would be 8x. And last times last would be 24. Am I ever going to be able to combine those to get a negative 4? No, I'm not. So then I would try the 12 and the 2. So if it's x and 2 and x and 12, this would give me x squared, first times first. Outside times outside would give me 12x. Inside times inside would give me 2x. And last times last is going to give me 24. Are those going to combine to give me negative 4? No, so I've tried that. How about 4 and 6? So x and 4 and x and 6. So first times first is x squared. Outside times outside is 6x. Inside times inside is 4x. And last times last is 24. Are those going to combine and give me negative 4x? No. And so the only thing I have left to try is the 1 and the 24. First times first is x squared. Outside times outside is 24x. Inside times inside is 1x. And last times last is 24. Are those going to combine to give me a negative 4x by adding or subtracting? No, it's not. So I've tried every possibility, and I ended up with no answer for factoring. And so we're going to call that prime. Okay, I'll give you another video for later on for you to practice on when a is not equal to 0.